This is AssetRush The Talk, where we talk with innovators and pioneers of the financial sector. Today I'm here with Pascal from Green Blue Investments. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Philippe. My name is Pascal Botteron. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Green Blue Invest. And we are a company that is developing and managing ESG products.
So tell me a bit, what drives you?
Actually, the objective is really to use an experience in investment coming from both the academic world and the practitioners' world in order to manufacture ESG products, so environment, social and governance products that make sense, that have a catalyst, that have a process, a thinking process where we believe that if you are good, for example, in governance, you will generate positive externalities on environment, on social aspects. And we have tried to really develop products that are innovative and that try to respond to a purpose that investors are looking at.
So, I mean, the whole theme is extremely large and there are many people paying attention to it, especially in the last couple of years. It's a growing topic, growing investment theme. So how do you differentiate yourself from maybe others?
That's a good question. You know, when you develop ESG product, you may be tempted to be very marketing, to play a lot on environment topics. This is important. What we try to do is always to find a catalyst that is a combination of performance catalyst, because when you do performance product, you want to generate performance, otherwise you do philanthropy. And we want to generate as well catalyst on environmental, social and governance aspects. So typically one of our investment programs is driven by governance. Mm-hmm. And as a very simple example, if you have a company that is well governed, the company will be more stable. Yes. Will be more equipped to navigate any type of storms. And that's, with this type of objectives you have in governance, you will probably have a more stable employee base. Mm-hmm. And if you think to the social cost of firing and hiring people, this is awful. Yes. Okay? So we can reconcile the notion of having a good governance that will add performance to the company shares, but as well having a good governance that will drive more social and environmental aspects.
Clearly, your main focus is the governance. Tell us a little bit more in detail on an example, maybe, how this effect plays out or what the exact effects are.
So, for example, there is an oil and gas company in Finland called Neste Oil. And in 2016, the board has reworked a bit its dynamic and the vision of the company. And the company, over the last 5 years, moved from being an oil and gas company to become a leader in biofuel, a market leader in biofuel. And if you look at this process, it started with the board, a board reflection, a board dynamic that led the company to rethink the strategy and then to draw a new strategy that impacted positively the company, leading the company to gradually exit or decrease its oil and gas activity, traditional oil and gas activity, in order to increase a more green activity in biofuel. All this started with the board. And what are the positive externalities? 3. The first one is on the E. Mm-hmm. This is a company that is more active, more E-friendly. S, because employees have a purpose, mm-hmm. are more happy to work with this company. And then performance. If you look at the stock price has been multiplied by 4 since 2016. If you check other traditional oil and gas company, this is not the case.
Anastasia.
Yeah, my question is, so you identify those companies, but how do you think it creates an impact?
It's an excellent question because if you want, in the industry there is a lot of confusion between ESG and impact investing. And everybody has his own definition. The way we look at ESG is more for liquid investments, liquid equities, for example, where it's almost an investment style where you try to invest in companies that are more E&S friendly. Impact is really how you measure the impact. For example, if you make, and it's going towards more illiquid assets, if you make an investment, for example, in a company in Africa where you will create new jobs, you will have impact on the environment and so on, you can measure it. And I think the boundary between ESG and impact, this is how you measure it. So we are in between. We are more ESG than impact in the sense that when you have a good governance, if we use the examples we discussed before, you will probably generate an impact because a well-governed company will do better for the environment. We discuss a lot the social aspect, but as well the environmental aspect. It's going to be triggered by the board, but it's not going to be measured like an impact project. So I would say we are ESG, but we are a bit the closest to impact, but still ESG.
So where do you see the impact of your actions?
The impact of our actions, actually, in our product, we have demonstrated, and in our academic research, we have demonstrated that well-governed companies outperform the other companies by 4% per annum. Mm-hmm. So this is a very strong signal to any type of companies, any type of boards, that if you have a good governance, if you act with the ethic you should have at the board, you will perform better and the company will perform better. The social and environmental aspect will be better. So this is our impact, is if you want to make a very strong message to the world, to the management and the board members of those companies, that if they work on a better governance, it's going to impact the company, the shareholders, the stakeholders positively.
How do you see that playing out now in the results of the portfolios that you built?
So the portfolios we have built show that there are industries that are better governed and other industries that are less better governed. You will probably not be surprised that, let's start with the less well-governed sectors. Oil and gas or energy are struggling. Okay, that's a fact. They have not really worked on the transition. They are still very much engaged in oil and gas. You see that probably the aftermath of 2008, the financial sector is still struggling with the governance. And to the opposite, we have better governed sectors. Consumer sectors are better governed, and tech. Okay. And tech probably because they are more innovative, they are more strategic. They take care, you saw that in Menlo Park in California, that the tech giants try to make their employees happy, which is something that in old-fashioned companies that is less seems to be less important.
Do you think that also their ecosystem thinking, their purpose-oriented thinking, and maybe also let's say their platform models apply more to that governance?
It could be a result of the governance.
Yes.
In the sense that if you, theoretically, the board of a company is really driving the strategy, giving the direction. Sure. The management of the company is executing the strategy. And I think this segregation of responsibilities is quite important in the way you run a company. So in this context, if you have a company that is relatively new, the example you mentioned, it's easier to implement. Yeah. If you take a company that is relatively old, for example, some banks, it's more difficult to steer the company and to change and to make the transition. So this is why we see probably new companies actually adapting better to what we define to be a good governance.
That I can follow that thought pretty clearly. On the other side, you could say that established companies have a longer history in actually solving problems, in actually implementing their structures, maybe also being more compliant, a bit more, let's say, more balanced in that sense as well, less impulsive. Do you think that they just are not able to translate this in nowadays behavior? Or do you think that this is just something that sometimes has to be recreated with the experience that was maybe done from other lives, or from, better to say, from a younger crowd?
I think the perspective you are drawing is also the fact that we're in the middle of an industrial revolution that started with, and if I go back to governance, what is key is two notions: resilience and agility. And actually, in your questions, you address resilience.
Yes.
And I would say resilience is the way we were looking at governance already 100 years ago. 100 years ago, we were really looking at how the company was equipped to face any type of storms, bad events. And then you have the notion of agility. And the agility is to adapt. And when you have an industrial revolution like this one, you need to adapt. You need to adapt to the change. You need to adapt to the changes in preferences, because you see how fast we can move to new type of media. And this notion, you need to have a board that has this agility and that brings this agile culture through the whole organization. And that's the key, is how you move from a board to the company. And all this, I would say the square root of all this is the culture. You have a culture in a company, and the board is extremely influential on how he wants to bring the right culture to the company.
And into, of course, into the future.
Exactly. Future is a key word. The way we try to measure governance, we look at the communication of the companies, especially in their annual reports, but other type of communications. And you mentioned the keyword future. Among the components we are looking at in terms of governance, one of them is strategy, because strategy drives the future. And the key word to define a strategy is future.
But also the purpose that actually the company or the services are serving, the endeavors are serving. Now, one could say that established companies have their purpose, otherwise they wouldn't have been around for so long. And usually purpose also can drive innovation, because it's pretty clear for what you stand and where you go. And still, that somehow does not always trickle down into the corporate structures, right?
We see that directly in ESG in some financial institutions where the board wants to do ESG. And when you speak to the bottom of the institution, you see clearly that the message did not come down. So again, the culture on how you disseminate, or I would say to transpire the culture from the top to the bottom, is key.
So that is now a difficult question, but I guess especially in your field, you've seen many companies that want to be ESG. I would say only a percentage really achieves to be. What would you recommend? What would you say to them?
So I think if you want to be ESG, you become 100% ESG. That's a very difficult decision to make. That's the decision we made, and we decided to start 4 years ago from scratch, completely 100% ESG focused, so that when you get up in the morning, when you sleep, when you have your day, you think, you work, and you develop ESG. And that's very, very important to have this objective in mind. And that's a challenge for many companies, because they have the old business that is very lucrative. And you need to balance between the two business. And I think this is why when you are, I would say, an emerging asset manager like us, it's a big advantage, because when we have a discussion, when we discuss with our large clients, large pensions and so on, we have really a discussion on how we are going to improve the ESG process of us, but as well of other players. And the way that we, or the fact that we think only to this, keeping in mind that we want to outperform, that's key, helps us to progress. And I did not mention in the discussion, but we have other investment programs where we constantly think to combine this notion of purpose, performance catalyst. And we thought, as we discussed at the beginning, E is probably 90% of the ESG today. Everybody is doing E. Yes, this is very helpful from a marketing purpose and so on. But on the E, we had a lot of thinking on how can we detect, coming back to your question, who is sincere about making an E investment. And that was a long brainstorming, and we projected ourselves to the future. And we said, and we tried to think who will be the winners of decarbonization, because what the governments want to achieve is everybody to decarbonize. So there will be a Google, a Facebook, a Microsoft, etc. of decarbonization. So we tried to understand who will be the winners. And if you project yourself in 2030 or 2050, you try to see or to think who has won the race. And working backwards, we came to the conclusion that the people who have won the race are the people who have invested the most in research and development for decarbonization today. So then we said ourselves, how do you proxy an investment in research and development for decarbonization? And the answer is patents. Again, the academic literature shows you that you can proxy an R&D budget with the number of patents that are owned by a company.
It's a clear statement.
Exactly. So what we did, we worked with an AI company and with another investment boutique to screen 600 million of documents, including all the patent database, to do two things. First of all, to ask the AI machine what is decarbonization, and the answer is 600 concepts, going from smart grid to car batteries, but also to vegan. And then we went a second time to the AI machine and asked what are the most impactful patents in each of those concepts. And we are capable now to build for our clients portfolios in specific themes composed of companies that have really a purpose to make the change happen, because they have developed patents on their own, these patents.
So I understand you have lots of academic minds working with you, and you have lots of knowledge on governance. But do you engage with the boards of the companies you invest in?
Actually, that's an excellent question, and that's a project for us. And if you look at the development of Green Blue Invest, the first thing we wanted to do is to demonstrate to the world that when you have a good governance and a good ESG, you generate outperformance. And over the last 3 years, we demonstrated this. Our products have generated a significant outperformance. So now the market has a recognition that when you have a good governance, you generate outperformance, which paves the way to us to do exactly what you said. We have the ambition in a few years, because it takes time to do it well, to make engagement investments where we will help companies to improve the boards, exactly the way we described, in order to help the company to move from being a poorly governed companies to a well-governed companies. And as mentioned, if you assume that there is a performance gap of 10 to 15% between a poorly governed companies and a well-governed company, you can imagine that over 3 years it can be a performance impact of 50%. But all this will take time, and we really take the time to do things right. And so far so good.
Absolutely, and probably one more point from my side. So you work a lot with the public companies, but do you also look at the private sector, at smaller companies, to engage with them and help them grow?
So actually, that's an objective we have to launch next year. Coming back to your previous question, we are in ESG, but in the ESG world, probably closer to impact, but we want to make the step to impact. So that's something we will realize next year, to try to detect VC companies where we can add value. VC companies only in impact. Very important, where we can help them to improve. So that's a project that will come out next year.
So your company also assists in creating growth on that side. So from a capital investment base on to actually almost an activism into governance, and then also supporting, so to say, many more companies and many more endeavors with that. So what would you describe as your key contribution to the growth in this market?
There are two components of your question. Our company, what we try to do, we have capital from our clients, yes, and we try to orientate this capital to the right investments that respond to all what we discussed. So our contribution is, there are many aspects of our contribution. The first one is to help our investors, obviously, to do performance, but as well to have performance that have a purpose and that generate these positive externalities. And we are very methodic in our approach. First of all, we do it on liquid assets, yes, and that's our priority. And to come back to our question, that will remain our first priority, because we build a business, and the higher the assets we will raise, the higher the impact we will be able to do. Sure. I have a joke, a lot of people say, Pascal, with your methodologies, people in the US, they will realize that if they change the words in their annual report, they can tweak, and then you will fall in the trap. Okay, today we have 230 million in a 40 trillion market. So one day, if we run billions in the strategy, they will start to listen to us. And that's where we will do a bit the impact. But we need to come back to your question, we need to go step by step. First of all, to grow this business very well, to stabilize it. And then we will continue to do engagement, or we will start, to do engagement, and in a second step also to do pure impact. And these projects are live, they are in development.
So now with the job you're doing right now, you actually do a lot for the ecosystem of investments, or for the financial sector. How much do you see in interacting with others on these topics? How open are you? How purpose-oriented are you in collaborating with others and strengthening the ecosystem of investments?
We are very motivated to collaborate with as many people as we can. We have developed white labeling or JV with some other players in the industry. I think if you want to do impact, we are not here like an old school banking where you have competition and so on. We are here to make our planet better. Yeah. Okay? We fundamentally believe. Let's turn it differently. I think the human nature in its majority is very money focused. People want to make more money, they want to do more performance. And we're not going to change that. And what we want and what we are working on is showing to people that they can make even more money by investing better. And a good ESG fund generates outperformance.
Actually, through stability, and of course with that, the impact that is generated, you actually not only lead to a higher performance, but also to actually a more stable ecosystem and to more stable partners in that ecosystem.
Exactly. And basically, we have a specific savoir-faire. I mentioned decarbonization in governance. And more people are saying us, can we team up with you on using your savoir-faire? So obviously we are an asset manager, we have our own product, but if we can find ways to team up, to collaborate and to expand, that's an objective. And I think If we speak of impact investing, a lot of people, and you heard about Greta and so on, a lot of people think it's going to be a top-down change. It's a collection of thousands, millions of little projects that will change really the world. We are one of them. And if we can create neural networks of all these projects, I think we will solve most of the problems of our planet. It's going to be a bottom-up change that will make the change happen.
Well, what do you think is the timeline to really make big steps on this? Because we see certainly an effect in the younger crowd today. They really want this planet to change. They make a lot of efforts for this. But on the other side, you also have controversial topics like that Greta has maybe only 1/10 of the followers of a Kim Kardashian, and which lives a completely different life, right? So how much does it need to really change that behavior? How much energy and how much time will that need for you to actually make your point worldwide?
So I think, it's going to take time. Unfortunately, I would say the obvious answer would have been yesterday.
Yeah.
But the reality, it takes time. It takes time because if you look at pure impact on ESG assets, they are growing but not fast enough.
Yes.
Now I can tell you, if I take a company like us, when we started, we had 5 million seed money, day one. And today we're at 230.
Yeah.
And we had all the COVID lockdowns in between.
Yes.
So not possibility to meet clients and so on. So there are a lot of interest. A lot of people that love what we do. So I think the direction is the right one. But that's a lot of work.
I heard a very nice quote lately. A friend told me, grass is not growing faster when you pull on it. Yeah, which is of course a great metaphor in this context. Yeah, because it really just needs more people that actually are interested in that. There needs to be more grounds to be covered, and I guess you're certainly on the right path of doing that, especially when you can help everybody else in the ecosystem to actually join you in that, share your experience or work together with them on products for their investors and make that impact, that investment and basically the support for your endeavors even bigger.
Yeah, I think we all speak of the benefits of impact on ESG and so on, but at the same time, there are rules of business, and we build a business, we build a company.
Yes.
And you need to run a company as another company.
Yes.
So the rules of the games, beside the fact that we do impact on ESG, have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
When you run a company, the company has to be profitable, has to manufacture high-performing product, and so on and so on. So all this, I would say the rules in our industry, people like you to have a long track record. So usually 3 years. We have it now, and you need to play with these rules. So to come back to your question, the problem is with ESG and impact, we cannot wait.
Yeah.
And that's it. So the hope is we have a majority of our clients that say, yes, we love what you do, we cannot wait, and we come in. So we are changing.
Yes.
Maybe you were speaking of the ecosystem. What would be good is to have more companies like us.
Oh, definitely. And hopefully many more investors and many more people that believe exactly in these selections and in this approach. So would you say today maybe it's still performance outweighing the impact, but do you think that will change as well in terms of mentality at some point?
I think it's progressing, but there is something that will not change. People invest for performance.
That's true.
There is a big part of research dedicated to the fact that future decarbonization is going to negatively affect the value of certain companies. And then we also know that investors are also driven by basically loss aversion. Do you think this somehow can also implicate the growth, the switch of investors towards more sustainable investing? Basically, they're afraid that future investments in carbonized companies going to be negative in their portfolio?
You saw one of the largest pension plan in the Netherlands that they made the decision to exit fossil fuel. So that goes exactly in your direction. I think we had in our research a lot of thinking about that. And I tell you, a true answer, there is no true answer. Because what you suggest is probably where the industry is going. We want to invest in clean companies, if I simplify. However, today we have the big oil and gas companies that continue to produce coal, oil, etc. And if we put them aside, if we ignore them, they will make no progress. And imagine that if we manage to convince or manage to have, let's say, two giants, BP and Shell, but there are many others, ExxonMobil, etc. If suddenly they develop the right technologies, if suddenly they reduce their greenhouse gas emission by half, we will do probably more impact than having a portfolio of companies that have low carbon emission. But that's philosophical.
Yeah.
And there are as many arguments for one solution as for the other. So that's these are the big discussions in the topic. Now, to answer your question, we saw in the rallies or equity movements this year that people are still buying oil and gas companies without a lot of issues this year. You know, when oil and gas was going up, the oil and gas companies were doing very well. So that's it. No, we need to find a way, probably activism on these companies, because the substitution, as we saw at the beginning of the interview with Neste Oil, when you go to the direction of new energy, clean energy, you can build new businesses and you can make positive impact. But that's as well, you know, the world is responding. I don't want to be too much academic, but to supply and demand. If the demand for oil and gas decreases, that's probably the best way to solve the problems. It's not really to work on the supply, it's also to work on the demand.
Actually, it's a lot of fun to talk to you and to listen to you and to being part of your journey. So I thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much for joining the AssetRush ecosystem and being part of that. And I hope we will have great response from our viewers, listeners, and participants at our events. So I hope together with them and together with our network, you will create a lot more of the good things you do.
Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you, Philippe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.